Hello and welcome to Read. Today I want to talk about a particular short story from Borges' collection, The Aleph and Other Stories. I want to talk about his story, The Writing of the God, or the God Script. A couple of quick preludes or disclaimers before I start. Old-time viewers will notice that I'm actually rocking a different camera angle. I've rearranged my room, and so I'm trying to find a kind of another angle or shot that kind of looks nice, and I'm kind of digging this, but let me know if it's too different or if it's not really that much of a vibe. I'm sure I can kind of figure out a way to make it work so that we can go back to the old camera angle if need. And also, I have made a video on Borges before. I made a video on his collection Fictions or Ficciones, which is entirely too short and is part of a different theme or a trend of what I want to get into this year, which is to start making videos talking about specific stories, because I think for short stories in general, but especially for Borges, I have talked about entire collections, I always feel like it's just way too much of an oversimplification, and so I feel like I do want to spend some time digging in and just talking about specific stories, even if it means the videos are going to be a little bit shorter. I feel like at least the videos are likely to hold up and be more interesting, or I'll be more happy that I've made them. So yeah, I might talk about more stories from this collection in the future, but for now I'm just talking about The Writing of the God because I recently, just earlier this week, reread it because my brother is reading Borges for the first time. He's reading Fictions, and we wanted to talk about a story together, and I actually recommended, partly because of his own interests, that he go and check out The Writing of the God or the God Script. And I've come to feel that I always say this, but I always say this about different stories, but I feel like this is such a good short story of Borges, just to kind of get people to read so that they hopefully realize immediately like what an intellectual powerhouse and behemoth Borges was, and just because in only 6 pages there are so many ideas, but it's not as like hard to digest as something like Tlon Ukbar Orbis Tertius, and it's not as kind of it's not as long as some of his other stories, which are always pretty short anyway. But quick summary of the story. I'll talk about a couple of cool references and things that I got, and I'll also talk about another interpretation that's not that interesting, and it's probably not that valid, but I thought I'd mention it anyway because it's something that I only thought about after a second read, and it could be fun to just sort of provide an option or to provide an insight as to what can happen the second time you read a story. So the general plot or the premise of the story is that it starts with the introduction of a cell, like I imagine it as being sort of buried in the ground, and as it being sort of cylindrical. It has a dividing wall in between that has a window. In one, again, it might not be a semicircle, but in one semicircle of the cell sits our narrator, main character, who is a priest, Tsinakan, and I believe it's like a Mayan or an Aztec priest. And in the other side of the cell is a jaguar, like a live tiger. And the priest is a prisoner, and it was a priest of the pyramid of Kaholom, and they were the pyramid was like ransacked by conquistadors, I suppose, and the priest was taken, tortured. They wanted to find out where the buried treasure was, but the priest remained devout and faithful and withheld his silence through torture. He found himself in the bottom of this cell, which is usually just completely pitch black, but once a day, for just a brief moment, the top opens, the cellar or the jail keeper comes to bring food and water for the man and the tiger, and in that brief flash of light, the man can see the tiger and he can see the world. And what happens is, in his extreme sort of boredom, I suppose, or the fact that nothing's happening, he first starts to The first thing he does, the first active step, I believe, is deciding to remember as many things as possible, which is already a kind of cool idea. And it's reminding me of, or kind of making me want to go and read Knausgaard or Proust. But in his searching and in his investigation of the memory, the priest realizes that his god, another name for the god, was the tiger. And the priest is looking for a way to get out, a way to escape, to transcend to transcend his physical and mortal bounds, and realizes that there's got to be some sign or some script or some writing that is the code the code that signifies the presence of the god. And so another way of thinking about it, if we're thinking about a simulated reality or like a video game or whatever, there's obviously the displayed simulacrum, but there is the underlying code which is kind of making everything happen. What happens is, after a very kind of major prophet inspired dream the priest has, he starts to study the Jaguar to look for signs of the god's script, and eventually realizes that within the spots on the tiger, it reveals this hidden script. And so at the very end, at the climax of the story, the priest has come to this like divine realization of what the 14 words or 40 syllables are that could help him transcend his mortal body, but he decides not to say it, because having reached the point of enlightenment, he is not himself anymore. His body doesn't matter, and he allows the words of God and the body to die with him, because the priest has already sort of transcended. Really cool idea. Go and read it if you haven't already. And it made me think of a couple things. So these are a few things that I've only thought about after a second read, because maybe I hadn't known about it beforehand. It reminds me a lot of a particular Zen koan. I can't remember the name of the author, unfortunately. Hopefully I can edit it in. But I've got the koan here. It's Manjushri Enters the Gate. And I want to read it out loud, and so that I don't make any mistakes. But one day Manjushri stood outside the gate when Buddha called to him, "Manjushri, Manjushri, why do you not enter?" "I do not see a thing outside the gate. Why should I enter?" Manjushri answered. And so, yes, it's the Buddha calling and talking to Manjushri, but Manjushri is also a representation or an embodiment of the wise, or the wisdom of Buddha. And it reminded me as well, I think this occurs in The Journey to the West, where there's a scene where the Monkey King is kind of in conflict with the Buddha, and the Buddha is sort of like challenges him to go out and find some area or something. The Monkey King tries to get away. I'm only going from secondhand knowledge because I haven't yet read The Journey to the West, which will be a sort of big bucket list item at some point. But essentially the Monkey King just zooms all the way out as far as he can, and in defiance of the Buddha, he urinates on like a pillar or a column. After doing that, he kind of notices that something weird is going on, and it turns out that the column is actually the Buddha's fingers. All of the universe is within the bounds of the hands of the Buddha, and just this idea of, for an enlightened being, there is no space. Everything that is embodied, everything that can be, is embodied by and exists within the Buddha or within God. And I feel like another way that Borges sort of explores this is that it is possible that you were able to find, or that the priest was able to find the God's script anywhere. However, because of his sort of extreme destitute nature, and because of the fact that all he had around him that was a creation or created by God was the Jaguar, it was actually looking at the biology, at the construction of the Jaguar, and that was what helped the priest see the God's script. What's interesting though, and what I was thinking about, is whether or not the sort of Jaguar was actually necessary, and it's sort of sowing a little bit of doubt within me, because one of the interpretations that I had, which, admittedly is not a very interesting interpretation, but is just this idea of it actually being a delusion, and that the priest sort of has a almost mental break and convinces himself that he has the last that he has these words that would help him kind of escape, but it's a very kind of post-traumatic stress denial way of processing the really terrible situation in which he's found himself. And because I was just thinking about whether or not the Jaguar was even necessary, because if the sign or the script of God could be found in any biological thing, he possibly could have found it by looking at his own fingerprints, or thinking about his own immune system, or anything within his physical body, which is kind of sowing this doubt as to whether or not the priest is like real. But when I say real, I mean I don't actually believe that he kind of achieved that oneness and that unity with God, because as Borges says, and as he writes, let me find it. So, the idea of a divine utterance came to me, the narrator, as puerile or as blasphemous. A god, I reflected, must speak but a single word, and in that word there must be absolute plenitude. No word uttered by a god could be less than the universe or briefer than the sum of time. The ambitions and poverty of human words, such as all word universe, are but shadows or simulacra of that word, which is the equivalent of a language and all that can be comprehended within a language. Of course, we're getting ideas of God being, like I am that I am, and the fact that any kind of extra words would be superfluous. They could be further summarized down into, a more condensed, more true, more godlike utterance. It made me think, why did there have to be 14 words? Why is there 40 syllables in order to accomplish this transition? Is that the required phrase for transitioning from human to godlike form? And if that's the case, then why is there no even shorter phrase? Like, it's still making me think that the priest is potentially deluded and never actually got to that godlike state that he desired, and instead, just in denial, kind of believed that he had achieved this enlightenment before, right before the end of his time. I want to read some cool things, just because Borges is a great writer, and so here's a kind of extract that gave me Book of Daniel, Book of Ezekiel vibes. Ecstasy does not use the same symbol twice. One man has seen God in a blinding light, another has perceived him in a sword, or in the circles of a rose, and then I'm adding in parentheses, or in the spots of a jaguar. I saw a wheel of enormous height, which was not before my eyes, or behind them, or to the sides, but everywhere at once. This wheel was made of water, but also of fire, and although I could see its boundaries, it was infinite. It was made of all things that shall be, that are, and that have been, all intertwined, and I was one of the strands within that all-encompassing fabric, and Pedro de I'm going to butcher this, Alvarado, who had tortured me, was another. And yeah, it's really just classic Revelation stuff, but I think that Borges is drawing a bit more from some sort of Buddhist and potentially even some Vedic or Hinduism elements, because it's reminding me a lot of the stuff that I read in the Bhagavad Gita, and also just some stories that I've read of Vishnu, with Vishnu eating dirt, or Krishna eating dirt is probably more accurate. It's a very cool story, and the reason I wanted to return it and wanted to talk about it was because I really have just kind of never gotten over this idea of why did the priest need 14 words as opposed to just the one, and is because anything short of godness is insufficient and is incorrect and is false or a simulacra. So that was sort of never resolved or anything. At the end, the priest just decides to sit there, not speak the formula, lying in the darkness, and allow the days to forget me. It's still an incredibly moving story, and you're more than welcome to disagree with my kind of skeptical or cynical interpretation, but I thought I'd mention it, talk about why I love reading Borges so much and why I'm a fan of his intricately constructed labyrinths. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.